day, and thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to Africa Mining Summit for the invitation to speak to you today. My name is Mametja Moshe. I am the CEO and founder of Moshe Capital. And I look forward to talking to you for the next 10 to 15 minutes about beyond 2020, where the mining industry is going and the trends that we've seen. I'm just going to share my presentation. Firstly, again, thank you very much to Africa Mining Summit for the invitation. My topic today will be on mining of the future beyond 2020. What do we have to look forward to? Firstly, I want to introduce Moshe Capital to you. Moshe Capital is a South African advisory and investment company. We are 7 years old this year, and we lead two businesses. The advisory business, as mentioned, the advisory business is broken into a management consulting business that does strategy, operational efficiencies, valuations, due diligences, corporate governance, and ESG. And we have a corporate finance arm that looks at mergers and acquisitions. We look at restructurings, we look at equity and debt capital raises. And on the corporate finance side, we work mostly with listed companies across the globe, but mainly with an African presence. We have done work in Johannesburg, we've done work in Botswana, Uganda, Ghana, Zambia, and other countries on the African jurisdiction. As mentioned, we have a presence in Johannesburg as well as in London, and we have strategic partnerships in China, India, as well as Switzerland. Our team is made up of ex-international bankers from Morgan Stanley, UBS, BAML, Deutsche Bank, Citi, HSBC, who together have over 100 years combined experience in investment banking. And all we have one goal, which is supporting African businesses that can become globally competitive and global leaders. Since establishment, we have executed transactions of over close to $1 billion. And we, as mentioned, we work across all jurisdictions, but mostly on the African continent, or with companies that have a presence in Africa. On the topic of today, mining of the future beyond 2020, here we'll be looking at what are the themes that we've seen in the mining industry in 2020, especially since the start of COVID-19, and what do we see going into the future based on the companies that we work with, as well as the global trends. Our first theme is around innovation. I think we can all agree that COVID-19 has made all of us think differently about our businesses. So in the mining industry has been the same as well. Everybody has had to think about what can we do differently, especially at times where it is important to social distance and decrease the workforce underground. This has shown us on the innovation side, on the first instance, we've seen a decrease in number of employees that miners are looking at, and this will be a trend going forward, given where COVID-19 and what it has shown us in terms of distancing. We've seen a decrease in capital intensity and looking at projects on innovation. How do we bring in technologies that make sure that we decrease our capital? All miners and I guess all companies have been looking at productivity. How do we improve efficiencies on our productivity, and how do we have different product mixes? How do we improve on logistics? So these have been some of the trends. And last and not least, on the innovation, we've seen a lot of mining companies look at renewable energy and starting to implement renewable energy projects to get off the grid. And we've seen governments being supportive of this move as we all move to lower carbon footprint and cleaner energy. The second trend that we've seen is around leveraging emerging technologies. This involved everything from water, as we've seen Vale in Brazil has looked at technologies that will help it in decreasing the amount of water that they use. We've looked at, there have been companies that most companies have been looking at how do they use less fuel, and more importantly, how do we lower our carbon footprint? This is a global trend, and I think at World Economic Forum, we've seen as well companies pledge on decreasing their carbon footprint. What we've also seen is around digital technologies. So what we've seen, Accenture reported that 82% of mining companies have stated that they want to increase investment in digital technology over the next 3 years. Here at home, my home country, South Africa, in a recent study, again, Accenture has interviewed over 30 top mining companies, and in those miners can create over 14 billion of value by 2026 just by introducing augmented reality, virtual reality, AI, robots, drones, and self-driving vehicles. Again, here at home in South Africa, we have seen companies embrace technologies such as Exxaro, which has spent over close to $250 million on its Belfast mine, which is 100% and first of its kind digital mine here in South Africa. These digital technologies and innovation are also being balanced with ensuring that we take mining employees on their journey. And this is actually critical. The theory has always been that increase in digitization will decrease in number of employees. But what we've seen as a trend is that it's not really about decreasing the number of employees, but it's the different skill sets that now you require from your employees. So we need to upskill employees to make sure that they can use the new technologies that are being introduced into the mines. Now, going on the next page, I want to touch on the next topic, which is carbon footprint. I think I've already started talking about this. We've spoken about it on what the miners are doing to make sure that they actually use renewable technologies. But another big trend that we've seen is on the investors and shareholders and what they require of miners when it comes to transforming from fossil fuel. Most investors are exiting investments in thermal coal companies. As an example, we've seen BlackRock announced in January this year that it will not invest in companies that derive more than 25% of their revenue from thermal coal. The fund manager has pledged to reduce their exposure in thermal coal, and it currently has investments of $1.8 trillion US in of actively managed assets in thermal coal. So they want to decrease that to ensure that the carbon footprint is looked at. And we've spoken about the renewable energy, but another trend is going into hydro-powered trucks, as an example. The fourth trend that we've seen is around the new era of new metals. So we're seeing a lot of battery metals. The key trends here, we all know that battery metals have been coming, and we have been seeing a trend moving towards battery metals, and we know EV vehicles are coming. But the two trends I wanted to highlight here, firstly, is the growth over the next 10 years on EV vehicles. We will be seeing about 27 CAGR growth over the next 10 years. So from 2020 to 2030, we see uptake by the industries and by, I guess, all of us across the globe of 27% on EV vehicles. What does this actually mean? Firstly, there has been previously a high reliance on China providing lithium. So a lot of OEMs and EV manufacturers are seeking less reliance on China. So what does that mean? It means that there will be a bit, although the demand might not change drastically, the composition of where the demand comes from will change. So as an example, we think there will be a surge of requirement for lithium, cobalt in Africa, in Europe, from these battery manufacturers, as well as OEMs and EV vehicle manufacturers. And then another trend that we've seen is these EV manufacturers starting to invest in mining companies. This poses a great opportunity if you are a junior miner, where you can partner with the EV players that become an investor in your company, as well as secure offtake. As an example, we've seen in the current year, Tesla secure cobalt supply from Glencore's DRC operations. We think that this trend will continue into the foreseeable future. Going into the next page is industry consolidation and M&A. Here we have seen a number of companies start working together. We think that there will be a consolidation, and companies that have struggled through COVID-19 and in recent years might be acquired by the larger companies. So through this, we think that there will be increased M&A, capital injections by the majors into the juniors, or acquisition of juniors, as well as strategic operations, and lastly, disposals of non-core assets. As Moshe Capital, we have been involved in a number of transactions in South Africa, and in fact on 3 other African countries, where companies are disposing of the non-core assets, or alternatively looking for partners to inject capital into those non-core assets. We think this trend will continue over the next 2 to 3 years. So the trick is the majors will be looking for great assets, and how do you actually sell your assets to make sure that they are the ones that are considered by the majors. Obviously, valuation and pricing and structuring of those assets is critical. And here again at Moshe Capital, this is where we've seen ourselves bring in innovation on how do we structure the transaction such that it makes sense for the acquirer, being the major, as well as for the miners. And for junior miners, the opportunity is acquiring non-core assets from majors. And again, they're looking at innovation on different structuring. If you are cash strapped at the beginning of the operations, or you want innovation through participation in future earnings by the majors. The last point I want to mention, last but not least, but most importantly, is this, what I call the social contract for mining. Previously, and I guess this is a trend across the globe, ESG has been seen as something nice to do. However, this is no longer the case. ESG is your social license to operate. Mining companies have previously always looked at ESG, and we have all been responsible, and it has always been a key requirement from our investors. However, the trend has changed, where it is not about ticking boxes, but we all realize that we have to be environmentally responsible, socially responsible, and our governance at top performance, because that is not a nice to have, but it's a very good value add on our returns to our shareholders. So how do we actually impact the communities that we operate around? We have seen that a lot of mining companies recently are starting to do projects to make the communities that they operate around sustainable well beyond the life of mine. And in South Africa, my home country again, In a recent webinar that we hosted in July 2020, we engaged with government as well as the Minerals Council and a number of mining industry leaders. And in that, we realized that companies are now starting to look at how do they develop SMEs, and in fact, how do they also ensure that there are technologies that are included into the communities where they operate, and how do they create sustainabilities into communities well beyond the CSI, and have employees and communities as their shareholders to create long-lasting and inclusive prosperity for these communities and these employees. And this in turn is actually good in returning value to investors, because you know that the company, you are aligned to the communities and your employees. So communities will not disrupt your operations. In fact, they will be looking out for their for your operations, because your well-being is their well-being as well. So doing good and creating inclusive prosperity is a social license to operate, and should not be left at the back, but should be at the forefront of every company. And we've seen this as a powerful thing for success. At Moshe Capital, we always look at inclusive prosperity, and how do we actually, in the investments we make, and as well as in the advisory mandates that we work on, how do we create inclusive prosperity for governments, for employees, for communities, whilst also realizing good returns for the investors. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact us at info@moshecapital.com. We are your mining investor of choice, hopefully, and mining advisor of choice. Thank you again for your time.